Good morning, everyone. My name's Sarah Gerecke. My job is Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Housing Counseling here at HUD. I am absolutely thrilled to be here today and so pleased that all of you joined as well, both here in the room and also online. And this event today will be recorded, so if you have particular fond memories, you can go to the web and look back. Some of you may not know that my very first job at HUD was in 1978 as a student intern under Secretary Patricia Harris, and I came back for another summer in 1979. I worked in the HR department first and then in the audit unit of the CDBG program. Even at that point, which was a long time ago, housing counseling program was more than a decade old. I was going to say this building was shiny and new, but it looked exactly the same. Secretary Carson believes, as you'll hear a little later in the program, and I believe, that the key to opportunity is housing. It means success for families, for communities, for children, for regional economies. It's pretty simple. Housing stability and housing affordability matter tremendously to health, wealth, and opportunity. But housing is complicated. It costs a lot of money. It's usually the largest single item in anybody's budget. It needs to be sticky. You don't get housing easily, and hopefully you don't leave it involuntarily or all that easily either. So it also needs to be flexible as family needs change, as family resources change, sometimes suddenly and unexpectedly. A new child, a new job, an illness, a divorce. Each of these events can affect a family's housing stability and housing affordability. For HUD and for all of you, the link between families and housing is housing counseling. The role of housing counseling, the original purpose, is to provide households with an unbiased expert who is free from conflicts of interest, whose only interest is to help the family overcome housing barriers and achieve their housing goals. I think there are some folks here in the room today who could probably name with me housing programs that have not lasted 50 years. Anybody remember UDAG? Section 23 leased housing, Section 235, which is the program I cut my teeth on, Hope 1, 2, 3, 4, or 6. Sometimes the names change, but often the programs need to change to adapt to the changing needs and circumstances. Housing counseling might need a name change. Counselor certification is raising the bar on HUD standards. The appropriations that Congress provides can change and does change, but the fundamentals of the program have served it well. And at HUD, we're proud stewards of a program that served at least 1 million families a year for the last 10 years, and 3 million in 2008 and 2009 at the height of the mortgage crisis. So, a milestone like 50 years is a gift and an opportunity. It's an opportunity to step back and also to look far forward into the future. Why has the program survived for so long? What are the foundations that have remained strong to keep the program in place? How should the program adapt to changing needs? Can HUD do more to leverage the vibrant partnerships with other public sector folks and private sector industry changemakers? If we all share the goal of informing and teaching families about the relationships between their income, their spending, their use of credit, and their housing decisions, then perhaps there are more ways to work together to ensure that more families have stable and affordable housing, regardless of the challenges facing them and facing each of us. Today's conference is meant to delve a little deeply into not happy, easy, let's congratulate ourselves issues, but really put on the table some of the thought-provoking challenges that we've been through and that we need to see going forward. And I am absolutely thrilled that we have a number of panelists with us today who are experts in the country, have been giving a lot of thought, and have actually done a lot of amazing work to help make this program strong and responsive to changing needs. I want to thank all of you for being here too, for your interest in the program, and I want to ask you a little bit of homework. I'm a teacher on this side. Your homework is to let us know your takeaways. What can HUD do better? How can we improve and support the industry? What should each of the housing counselors be thinking about or doing? What do they wish that we knew so that we can do a better job of making sure that all of the people we reach have better housing as a result? What's going to happen today is that we're going to have a number of panels. We're going to have in between the panels some snippets of a video we've put together that just commemorates the program. We're going to show the video in its entirety at the end of the program, and you are welcome to stay for that or start getting ready to go if you have to scamper out. The panels will be moderated, or not moderated, but led and introduced by Carr, who is a senior policy analyst in my office and a wonderful resource. We, of course, have a whole team of HUD and staff and helpers making today possible. But in between, we'll show some of the snippets from the video so you get a little taste of it. We'll also be joined after the first panel by Secretary Carson, and before the last panel by Acting Deputy Secretary Brian Montgomery. So thank you again for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Carr.
Thanks, Sarah. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Please keep your phone on silent. So if you haven't done so, feel free to do that right now. And as Sarah mentioned, this is being live webcast, so we'd like to keep movement in the room to a minimum. Our panel sessions, I'm sure you've looked at the program, are expected to be about 45 minutes. We expect 30 minutes for the conversation, and then we'll do 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A. When we get to Q&A, we would ask you to keep your comments and questions brief just so we can stay on schedule. Now, I think on to our first topic, our video snippet. As we discuss the different perspectives of stakeholders, we think it's really important to uncover the value of housing counseling from each perspective. So let's watch what some of our valued partners have to say about housing counseling.
Something that I witnessed firsthand in terms of seeing the value of counselors out in the field was during the crisis, seeing the way in which they really were community builders. And I think that is really sort of an understated kind of value that the housing counseling brings to the market. They really are trusted guides in a lot of ways in understanding the community and working with the community. And when you're trying to address a housing crisis or you're trying to address housing issues, you really want to be working with those people who are live in the community, serve the community, work with the community. That's the value they're bringing. They're bringing you key intelligence on the housing market that everyone can learn from and really trust that information.
What I want consumers to understand about housing counseling is that it's available, and it's available to everyone. And we offer a wide range of services that everyone can benefit from, whether you want to increase your credit score so you get a better rate, if you are struggling with debt, if you're looking to purchase a home, everyone can benefit from housing counseling.
All right, let's introduce our first panel and topic. So, our first panel topic is maximizing the value of housing counseling. The panel will be a discussion on the varying perspectives and goals of each type of stakeholder, so they can find common ground and get the best value from housing counseling. And for some of you who may not be familiar with how comprehensive housing counseling services are, let me say to you, housing counseling helps prepare people for home ownership, helps people find rental housing, and even can help people transition from homelessness to housing. Some of us think it's one of America's best kept secrets. Let me introduce our moderator, Pamela Marin. Pamela is the Senior Loan Officer of Innovative Mortgage Services. Pamela is an advocate of distressed homeowners across the United States who've experienced erroneous credit reporting issues that rose out of the crisis. She has worked with representatives of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the U.S. Treasury, past U.S. Senator Bill Nelson, and the National Consumer Reporting Association to push for the correction of erroneously reported credit data. Jonathan Lawless. Jonathan, Vice President of Product Development and Affordable Housing, Fannie Mae. He's led the development of several key initiatives at Fannie Mae, including Home Ready, the company's flagship affordability product. Deborah Johnson. Community Reinvestment and Community Partnership Manager, J.P. Morgan Chase. Deborah works on a national level to execute community development programs that support nonprofits in providing the education and counseling that prepares families for sustainable homeownership. Sarah Rodriguez, President-elect of the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. Sarah is also Chief Executive Officer and owner of Untitled and a partner at Mendez Rodriguez. Let's welcome our panelists. Pamela?
Okay. Our first question to the panelists is, what is the value of housing counseling to the consumer group that you represent? John?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having me here today. Really excited to get to talk about this topic, which I think is extraordinarily important. I think there's a lot of change that we're going to be experiencing in the next few years, so excited to talk about it. So let me just give my perspective from where I sit. So I'm with Fannie Mae, and we're credit investors. So I think the simplest answer I can give in terms of the value to the group I represent is that counseling reduces risk. We've seen it historically reduce risk when a borrower has run into trouble throughout the foreclosure crisis. It was something we leveraged heavily, so borrowers knew what their options were. These days, where we see the real benefit is now, of course, pivoting towards that pre-purchase process, helping people navigate their way through buying a home, which, as all of you know, is as pleasant as a prostate exam. And so really important that somebody helps hold people's hand. And frankly, from a credit investor, when we see borrowers get counseled, we actually see such a great reduction in the risk that our company is offering $500 to every loan that comes to us that has received counseling. So the reduction in risk is really, really critical. I'd say the other value that's going to get increasingly more important. At Fannie Mae, our focus on affordable housing has really pivoted from our focus on access to credit to much more about how do we create more affordable supply. Because as you know, you can counsel somebody all you want, get them credit ready, but if the only home they can afford, the only home that's available to buy is $800,000 unless they drive 3 hours outside the city, I mean, you're really not giving them an option. And so we've got to figure out how to solve the supply issue. But in the meantime, there are a lot of creative programs that are helping consumers navigate the lack of supply. You know, can you buy a home together with another family, right? Should you use a shared equity investment? How about these rent-to-own programs? So I think as our market grows in complexity, we're going to rely more heavily on counseling agencies to be able to provide that advice. The last thing I'm just going to say, and it obviously will come across very badly as I say it, but the value to us ultimately in pre-purchase is very little because we see so little of it. You know, when we started looking at how we can get counseling and integrated and pay money for it, our hope was that we would see a great growth in the number of borrowers that come to us that are counseled, because as Terry said, it's the industry's best kept secret. You know, why aren't we seeing more consumers getting counseled? And so if it's less than 1% of our business, it's very hard to get a company, you know, like Fannie Mae, who's focused on scale, to pay attention to how we get these programs up and running. So it does a great service to the consumers it touches today, but the need is growing, and the potential for it is so high that I'm really excited to talk to this group, hear from the other panelists about how we really incorporate it better into the housing purchase process.
I have to agree with John in terms of the risk factor as it relates to lenders, but I think housing counselors provide more than just education around the home. I think they provide the clients with the opportunity to learn about improving their credit, improving their financial situation. I think it goes beyond simply preparing for home ownership. I believe that they help with the consumer navigating around the best practices and moving forward with the largest investment that they'll make. They expose them to the protections that one has around predatory practices. I think it's a great opportunity for them to practice as if they're a homeowner without having signed that contract. Understanding affordability and what they qualify for are two separate and distinct things. So it's more than just home ownership. It financially stabilizes the consumer, which makes for a better, client for the bank.
Well, good morning, and thank you for having us. And I agree with everything that you guys have said. As part of the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, the demographic that we serve is Hispanic. We see the value of housing counseling agencies in so many ways, not just with financial literacy. As we know, in the Hispanic community, you're going to find two very different demographics right now that would be very, very well served by the housing counselings. The first one is, as the Hispanic demographic by large has a very little understanding of financial literacy, right? And it comes because in a lot of the countries, you don't want to put your money in the bank. You pay everything cash because your money might disappear. They don't really understand the concept of credit and how to use it. So the value that we see with this growing population is financial literacy. We have the Hispanic demographics is going to account for 54% of new home buyers in the next 10 years. And what we want to make sure is that we partner up with housing counselings and we tell them about these services so that we don't have what happened a couple of years ago, because the Hispanic demographic was also one of the demographics that lost the most when the housing crisis came. And that is the other point of view, that is the other demographic that I think within the Hispanic community that could really be well served from housing counselings. We're starting to see a lot of what we call boomerang buyers. These are buyers that the first time that they purchased, they didn't really understand what these loan products were, or how to have a budget, or how does credit work? What do you do with any of that? They bought a home, they didn't understand it, and they lost it. And the worst part is, most of them didn't even understand why they lost it or why they got into that predicament. So some of them are having a really hard time with, they want to purchase again, that's our American dream, but they want to do it correctly this time. So it's very important for us to get the message out there that there is a better way of purchasing by utilizing this. Another point that you made, Jonathan, that fits so well with the Hispanic demographic is that we are not your typical home buyer, right? Most Hispanics are self-employed, right? Or just like millennials, there's a huge, we are one of the biggest numbers in the gig economy with Uber drivers or anything like that. Our culture loves that multi-generational household and being able to have, not only grandparents move in with us, but, a lot of the Hispanic population, we have kids and we want them to come and live with us, right? Which is something that also happens. It's not just for Hispanic demographic guys, but I'm seeing that a lot with a lot of my other customers, where they're college-educated kids, once they graduate, because of the housing inventory, they can't find a home, so they're coming back into their parents' home. So I would love to see how, we were talking about the different programs that could be put in place to help the Hispanic demographic purchase. And one of the concepts was, well, how do you document all this multi-generational income so that you can get a loan? Well, that's where housing counselors can come in and teach these families, no, you can all not come in with cash and then go to the bank and pay for it. Let's have some thought process into making sure that we create a record and that we're systematic about this. One of the biggest things that we're passionate about is not just increasing Hispanic homeownership, it's increasing sustainable Hispanic homeownership. And that's where we see our alliance with the housing counseling programs to be so important, because by financial literacy and by being innovative with how we think about housing counseling is how we're going to be able to bridge that gap.
Thank you. Okay, where are the opportunities for greater alignment among housing counselors, realtors, and lenders?
It's a big question. So well, let me start by saying I have a good friend who started a few businesses that were successful, and he always said the simple thing about business is you have to have three things. Number one, you have to have something that somebody values. Number two, you have to have a way to get it to them. And number three, you have to have a way of dealing with competitors, right? You nail those three things and you're going to have a successful business, right? So as I think about counseling and sort of the opportunities that are presented for it and for the industry, number one, on its value proposition, as we know, it's there. Although the one thing I would say is we have to recognize that counselors play a really pivotal role in the lives of people that aren't necessarily looking for improved credit scores. They're just simply trying to figure out a way to buy a home without it feeling like a nightmare, right? And so I know everyone in this room, everyone that's listening, everyone, as soon as people know you're in the housing industry and they're buying a home, you get all these questions, right? And all of you, as you go through the buying process or are thinking about buying a home, you have the same kind of question. Prepaid interest, what is this thing? It's a really confusing, complicated thing. And so the one value I think counselors have is across the board, people who are wealthy, people who are poor, people who need credit counseling, people who have 800 credit scores, they all can benefit from having a third party who's not interested in making money off of them necessarily as in the transaction, gaining some, providing that sort of insight and guidance. And so I think one really big opportunity just in the value proposition for consumers is that. So the second thing that is necessary is distribution. And I think this is where counseling agencies really struggle, which is, if you want to have a marketing presence like a Quicken Loans, you need $1 billion, right? And that's probably underestimating how much money you need to spend. And so how do you make the market aware of the availability of these tools? So, I think technology is going to be the answer to that question, and working with the realtor community, working with lenders and others, finding a way to connect their technology and get it out there. Like right now, I can go online, I can buy a car, I can go and find somebody who can fix my toilet, right? I can do a lot of things on my mobile device, but all I can do is find an 800 number for a counselor. So there's just got to be a way that we can think creatively of leveraging mobile technology and integrating it into the mobile technology that lenders are building and other things like that. I think the last thing I would say too, and Deborah, I'm really curious to hear your comments on this as well. Loan officers oftentimes get a bad rap in the nonprofit world. I often hear like, oh, they don't really care, they're just trying to close a deal. But oftentimes when you sit down with loan officers, like, I really want to help the consumer, and I want to be a part of that process, right? And the reason they do is because when a counseled borrower comes to a loan officer, the loan officer doesn't have to explain what an escrow is. They don't have to explain what documents they need. It saves them time. It saves them energy. They feel like they have a consumer that they can build trust and rapport with. And so I think telling that story to realtors, to lenders, having a real crisp articulation of distributing it through those channels is a huge opportunity. And when they get it right, when counselors are available and that it's part of the process and it's well integrated to the industry, there is no stopping how big counseling can be. Time is money for loan officers, yeah,
right.
For realtors too.
So in terms of the loan officers, I think that during the foreclosure crisis, the trust factor was a problem between the nonprofits, the realtors, and the lenders. And, it's taken time to build back those bridges. And so when I think realtors, in terms of when they think of working with a nonprofit, it's going to add time, when it's the opposite. They're preparing the individual for home ownership. And for a lender, we get mortgage-ready people, so it cuts the amount of time that we have to spend, again, explaining to the consumer so that we can go out and seek more clients. So I think that the message is getting out there. It will take more time, but I do think that it is a secret. I think that counselors do an incredible job of helping consumers navigate through a very complex transaction. And I think that it's not limited to low and moderate income consumers. And I think that realtors sometimes also think, oh, they only work with low-income people, and that's not the case. And we can look at the numbers and see that since the foreclosure crisis, the income levels have tremendously gone up. Who's walking through the doors? I think that there is a missed opportunity in leveraging technology to reach more consumers and brand the nonprofit. So I think we need to do more work in that space.
So absolutely, and I mean, I echo everything that has been said, leveraging technology, right? So but we always tell our realtors, don't be a secret agent. If you want to do business, you got to get out there, you've got to leverage, but there's only so many hours in the day, right? As a business owner, sometimes I'm like, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do the work, I've got to make sure the work is done correctly. And then on top of that, I've got to go market with what time of the day. So we absolutely, know that that's the difference. So what we try to do is teach our realtors and our lenders, hey, leverage yourself. That's how you're really going to be able to grow, and that's how you're really going to be able to touch other people. Number one, very simple. As housing counseling agencies, we are in the business of referrals. You too. So it's something as simple as, hey, if you found what we did of value, please don't keep us a secret and tell your sphere. Because let me tell you something, the Hispanic community, if we like you, we will tell all of our friends, all of our family members, and that's how you get into the community, and that's how they're gonna know. You're providing something of value. And there's nothing wrong with telling the clients that you're servicing, hey, we would love for you to be able to refer us and tell other people about us. The Hispanic demographic is one by and large that we love our cell phones. A lot of Hispanic population doesn't have computers on their house. They're working. So definitely leveraging technology and leveraging resources for you by maybe having conversations with some of these stakeholders, like the realtors in your market or the lenders in your market, and having an education class for them. Like, let me demystify what housing counseling does. This is how we can help you and how we can help your consumer. At the end of the day, just like Jonathan was saying, housing counselings bring value to these people because time is money. Just like with you guys, realtors and lenders, they're running around trying to get a lot of things accomplished. So if you can verbalize to them how you can save them time and money and have a better prepared consumer so that there's no surprises before closing. I can't tell you how many times I have at the closing table where a lender calls me and says, I'm so sorry, but this loan is not going to go through because the consumer either made a deposit that they didn't explain into their bank account, or they went and bought a car, or they bought furniture. Things that could be easily avoided had this consumer gone through some financial literacy program with housing counselors. But you have to explain to those stakeholders around you, hey, this is my value proposition for you. So let's help each other out. You put us out there, and we'll provide the service for you.
I think we've got time for one more question. What improvement can be made in the delivery of housing counseling, if we could quickly go through?
So I'll start quickly on technology. I mean, we've mentioned it a couple times. I mean, this is the area that I think is the greatest area of opportunity. Fannie Mae's invested a lot of money to try to build a new platform. It doesn't have to be the platform everybody uses, but we want to have a sort of single source where we can plug in our tools, our AUS models, so people can get an underwriting recommendation from it. All of our brilliant collateral models. I mean, we want to give consumers via counselors the information that kind of gets rid of that asymmetry of information that makes everyone feel like they don't know what they're doing as part of the process, right? So technology is huge. The other thing I'll say is later this year, we're going to make a pretty major shift in how we deliver homebuyer education to focus much more on mobile first. And the goal is to get people in and interested. We don't want to be number 284 on the App Store. We want to be number 4, right behind Zillow, Houzz, Credit Karma, and then maybe us, right? And so we can get a mobile device that's out, a mobile app out there that really leverages technology. I think that'll serve the industry incredibly well. This isn't for us. This is really just an interest of getting the product out there a little bit more. I'm going to mention a couple other quick challenges that we just have to grapple with as an industry because, our vision has been that counseling should be used broadly. It should be well integrated in the process. But we have to be very careful that people don't take advantage of that opportunity and create situations that RESPA was really designed to take care of. And so RESPA is a big question. And the last one I'll mention is as we get people providing advice on mortgage products, there's always the question, are they a mortgage broker? And how do we arrange, how do we build a system that makes a ton of sense? So I think those are some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities for us to think through as an industry.
Well, for one, I think that housing counselors educate and guide, and they don't advise. But in terms of missed opportunities, I think there's an opportunity to look at more barriers that folks have, whether they're low income, middle income, or high income. I think we miss an opportunity when we don't do student loan counseling. I think we miss an opportunity when we don't teach around investments. I think the earlier on, and the different populations, so you talk about the Hispanic population, but what about the youth? I think that we need to begin earlier and align and look at who we're serving within our communities. And so high school students, middle school students, I think a lot more needs to be done in that space.
So maybe we were just talking about this. I have a high schooler, and I have a couple of, not to say anything against millennials, I love millennials, but it was interesting to me sometimes when a millennial didn't understand how to write a check or didn't do, or any of the stuff, or didn't understand how things balance because they're used to doing their banking on their phone. So I think and I was telling them that in my kids' high school, they have a literacy program, financial literacy program, and it was incredible when he came back home to me and he was like, oh, this is why you tell us we can't do this or that, because this is how it works. So I think that those opportunities about, getting them maybe a little bit younger, looking to maybe explain all these other things that are not as well known, like, hey, come with, boomerang buyers or with the other type of demographics that need, and then technology.
Thank you. Yes,
Kicked off.
thank
All
you.
right, thank you guys.
Thanks. Let's take some questions. All right, I'm gonna keep our panelists up here for just a few more minutes in case any of you all have any questions. There's a microphone there, so you should feel free to. Hi, Gene. Come on up.
I can't pass up an opportunity because I'm Gene Spencer, CEO of the Homeownership Preservation Foundation. We've been able to proudly serve the nation since I think it was about 2008 when we were tapped by the Bush administration to serve as a national resource for consumers who are facing distress, and then adopted by the Obama administration and subsequent administrations to be a primary service for consumers who are facing foreclosure. And so part of the challenge was to, as all of us in this community have, is to try to pull as many resources as possible together to support the work that we do. And so dealing with industry has been a key role of our organization because we don't do the actual, we bring in funds that we fund others to do the actual counseling. But one of the challenges that we've faced, and I think particularly Fannie and Chase could help with this, is the pushback that we do get when we deal with credit officers and others go, yeah, this kind of makes sense, housing counseling kind of makes sense, but I don't really understand the economics, so why should I really, what is a driver for me? And I get, because we have NDAs with Fannie, Chase, and everybody else, get some wonderful reports from you guys that show, how you think through the economic benefits of particularly default mitigation counseling. And it's the same thing from Chase. It's like, hey, powerful performance improvements from the borrowers that then justifies your ongoing support for it. But getting you guys to share it more visibly and more publicly would be really, really helpful. And I know you got to go through, I spent most of my career at Fannie, so I kind of know the process there of getting things. But to the extent that you could share those, how you think about it, and the drivers that you perceive as critically important in terms of improving the economics, in in the research reports or whatever, I think it would be really helpful at cracking, because you're the leaders in the industry. And if others see you doing stuff, then I think they're more inclined to give us the benefit of the doubt, particularly when there are some numbers around, the benefit. So that's a request that I'll throw out to the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to address that. And Gene, first of all, thank you for all the work that you guys have done throughout the financial crisis and since then. You've been a great partner to us, so I appreciate all that. I mean, look, the challenge with the economics on housing counseling from a sort of regulated industry is that we do see reduced delinquencies, and I'd be happy to sit down and share the data. I mean, we've seen at points in times have a 30% reduction in delinquency. That varies over time, but critically when you're a sort of an industry that's focused on capital, the question is capital benefit. Do I get a capital reduction as a result of having a counseled consumer? Right now we're working with our regulator on that. I hope that in the future, every industry from banking to others, when they look at risk and they say, hey, this borrower has been counseled, there's actually a benefit reflected in sort of the capital requirement, because that translates more directly to sort of the overall banking economics. But I mean, look, this is a challenging question, and I think counseling as an industry that's focused so heavily on subsidization is not one that can grow as much as we really want it to grow. And so piecing together the value to us, and again, through that lens of what do our actual rate of returns look like and what's the capital construct we're forced to abide by, the value to us, the value to Deborah in terms of bringing leads, making it easier, saving time, the value to different pieces, you could start pulling that together. I still think that ultimately there needs to be a consumer pay component to this. Now, what I'd love to see is a consumer pay component focused on the rich people who are getting advice on, how to pull their money out of a trust versus this source, so on and so forth. That kind of advice people pay for, and using that to subsidize the people that need it for free. And so until we get to that model where we're able to take all that value, and again, happy to share the data for us, and I know lenders have been very forthright in terms of a value of a lead, a value of sort of the quicker process. We can start piecing that together, but we've got to be really thoughtful about the overall math of how many borrowers actually get a loan. Because we don't want you to make every borrower get a loan, because it defeats the purpose, right? So you got to counsel some people that aren't going to come through to the later parts of the financial system. So I know that was probably a rambling, quick message, Gene. I apologize for the fast answer, but again, this is a challenge. But working together, I think there's a true economic way to make this a viable, non-necessarily subsidized industry.
All right, I think we're out of time, and I believe we're ready to, okay, so let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you so much. Very much appreciated your comments. And now we should have Sarah Gerecke coming up to introduce the secretary. So this is the part where I should probably tell jokes. If only I were a comedian. Let's make sure the secretary's ready. All right. Okay, I think we're good.
That was a fantastic panel. It's a great honor for me to introduce Secretary Ben Carson. His autobiography provides a much better introduction than I could possibly give him, so I'm going to recommend you read Gifted Hands if you haven't already. I'm going to provide a more personal introduction and maybe a little unconventional. But I've wanted to say this as I've seen the Secretary speak about housing counseling in so many places. My dad's a rheumatologist. He loves his job more than anyone I've ever met. He retired 25 years ago, but he's a doctor to the core. He had a large clinical practice, but he also taught, he wrote books, he did a lot of research. His specialty was rheumatoid arthritis, and at the time it didn't have a cure, and his patients were often in debilitating pain. My job in middle school was to go through patient charts and plot various blood work results for a given diagnosis. So I still dream about SED rates, even if I can't tell you what they are, and I know there wasn't a HIPAA back then. Dad was always really disappointed that none of his 3 children became physicians, but in a way we did. In my case, I used what he taught me to look at the evidence, to be open-minded about the diagnosis, to believe in the ability of people to change their lives for the better once they're given some tools or an opportunity. And I also learned that housing counselors, like doctors, don't have a magic wand. It takes a partnership to build expertise, trust, built on expertise, trust, and patience, for people to make changes to improve their health or their budget or their housing situation. Secretary Carson's passion for affordable housing as a vehicle for opportunity is felt throughout HUD. He's bringing new programs to HUD, including opportunity zones and envision centers, but he also has deep respect for programs that have a proven track record of effectiveness, programs that consist of a hand up and not a handout, including HUD's housing counseling program. I met with Secretary Carson very soon after he was confirmed as the 17th Secretary of HUD in March of 2017. He made it clear then and ever since the importance of providing people with the tools they need to create opportunities for themselves and their families. His support of HUD's housing counseling program has been remarkable, and I hope you will join me in thanking him for the investment and the trust he's placed in us. Secretary Carson.
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thank you all for joining us today, celebrating National Homeownership Month, and also acknowledging 50 years of housing counseling. At HUD, we have a mission that really has never wavered, that mission to provide safe and fair and affordable housing for all the people of our nation. And the housing counselors have made a tremendous difference. And we have some of the best people in this area anywhere. I always say at HUD we have the ugliest building but the best people. And but you know, when it comes to housing, everybody needs a place to call home, regardless of their age, their income, their educational level. It is said that home is where the heart is. And perhaps no one understands that better than our housing counselors. The families that you help receive more than a new set of house keys. They also receive keys to a new life, a life that is healthier, both financially and physically. The health of a community starts with the home. And, you know, as a doctor, I can tell you, so often people look pretty good on the outside, but sometimes on the inside there are horrible things going on. And the same is true of our national body here in America. Sickness in the housing sector can have a rippling effect, especially when dealing with an asset that is so fundamental to American life as an affordable home. Houses are more than just physical structures. They're social, cultural, and economic engines. The house is the base of the community, which is the base of the nation. And our mission at HUD is not just to provide people with a roof over their head, but we also want to give people an opportunity to move ahead, to become self-sufficient, to utilize their God-given talents in a way that they can, in fact, enjoy the pursuit of happiness in their lives. The personal wealth of home ownership is a giant step in climbing the economic ladder of success. And sustainable home ownership is the #1 builder of financial self-sufficiency in our nation. Do bear in mind that the average net worth of a renter is $5,000. The average net worth of a homeowner is $200,000. That's a 40-fold difference. And you hear a lot of talk about the wealth gap. A lot of it has to do with home ownership. But of course, making sure that home ownership is done in the correct way. And as people who've been around for a while know, not too many years ago, we were so enthusiastic about making sure people were homeowners and really didn't do the due diligence. And if we put people into a home they can't afford, you're not really doing them a favor. They lose the home, they lose their credit, they lose their future opportunities. And we never want to be in that situation again. And that's something that housing counselors are going to help us with tremendously. Now, HUD has a duty to make a difference in the lives of our fellow Americans through ensuring access to safe and affordable homes. And housing counseling has a unique history, coming of age during the turbulent struggle for civil rights in our country during the 1960s. On August the 1st, 1968, the Housing and Urban Development Act was passed, and the HUD Housing Counseling Program was born to educate Americans about a very complex house buying process. A year later, a network of HUD-trained and approved housing counseling agents began to spring up from coast to coast. The first focus of our housing counseling agencies was helping homebuyers to navigate the incredibly complex process of buying a home. A few years later, in 1974, recognizing the need for alternatives to home buying, rental counseling was added. The 1990s brought increased opportunity for lower-income households. States and cities started to receive grants that could provide down payment assistance, while public and private enterprises expanded their low-income lending programs. With an eye toward sustainability, housing counseling became a critical companion to many Americans' home ownership journey. In 2010, in response to the housing crisis, the Office of Housing Counseling was established. In short order, it expanded services, set industry standards, and paved the way to diversify the skills of housing counselors even more. And in 2017, HUD required that all HUD-approved housing counselors receive access to standardized training and certification by August 1st, 2020, ensuring that consumers across the country will receive well-rounded and comprehensive counseling services. Throughout the history of housing counseling, as the needs of Americans have evolved, so have the services that have been offered. Housing counselors have demonstrated the ability to leap into action in times of crisis, whether financial, such as the housing crisis, or natural disasters like hurricanes, earthquakes, and wildfires, or whether in response to the nation's legislative priorities, as in the case of opportunity zones. Today, we are constantly tracking housing data, listening to people and to our communities, identifying the needs that are emerging today, and preparing for the needs that will emerge tomorrow. HUD Housing Counseling has made tremendous strides in the first 50 years by building a nationwide network of housing counseling agencies, organizations, and stakeholders from the ground up. And as I've traveled around the country, I've had an opportunity to meet a lot of the housing counselors, and they're incredibly dedicated and interested in making sure that people's lives are maximized. And it's filled with passionate professionals who offer guidance and resources for those who seek it. The entire profession shares in the belief that every American should have access to safe and affordable housing. As we enter the next 50 years, the mission remains the same. We will always face new challenges. Our goals, initiatives, and range of services will continue to evolve with the times. Partnerships with cities, communities, and private businesses will continue to expand, improving our public housing stock. Technology will obviously play a greater role. Some of you probably saw some of the displays on the National Mall a couple of weeks ago. We are not lacking in technological know-how and innovation in this country. What we are lacking in is removing some of the regulatory barriers that allow us to use them, and we're going to be working on that very hard. And a new generation of housing counseling professionals will continue to live up to the legacy of those who've come before them. It's been an incredible half century for HUD's housing counseling program. And the great thing is that housing counselors have a sphere of influence, have the ability to help people not only in terms of their housing needs, but in terms of social needs in general. And our nation right now is in a difficult situation. We're a very strong nation, cannot be brought down from the outside, but we can be brought down from the inside. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Housing counselors have an opportunity to help people realize that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. We do not have to yield to the purveyors of division based on race, economic outlook, gender, age, religion. And we have people who are trying to exploit those differences. We don't need to do that. We can use our God-given talents in a positive way to reach out, help our neighbors. That's exactly what housing counselors have been doing. But as I look out at the passion, the dedication, the determination on the faces here today, nothing could be more obvious than the fact that we're just getting started. And thank you for what you do.
I do want to take a minute just to say thank you to Secretary Carson. We were just really excited that he was able to join us today. So now it's time for our next topic, the changing face of the housing counseling consumer. Housing counseling means different things to different people. It's important to determine the benefits across all stakeholder groups, especially as the needs of our consumers change. So let's examine what these stakeholders have to say about housing counseling.
I think the most important thing I learned from home counseling agency is that there is a way to buy a house, and it's a matter of making the money available. I think a lot of people in my generation, we're so burdened with student loan debt, and we think, oh my God, how am I going to save 3%, 3.5%, or whatever number of percentage, or thousands of dollars, and we think that we can't buy a house. I know I was guilty of that, and it wasn't until I took a home counseling class and I realized the different products that were out there and how to save up the money that I realized buying a house is possible.
The first call, I don't like it. But she started asking me for my money, what are you spending? You have this in your bank account. You go to, example, recreation park every week. Why you go to the Orlando? And then that's my money. I enjoy my life. But you need to saving money, or you can spend your money every weekend. Yeah, you're right, but your credit card is too high. You need to at least have a 20% every month, or if you can pay off the whole thing, it's good. But at least you need 20%. I said, okay, I try to work on it. But it's like a dream. I'm honest. This helped me a lot.
Personally, I believe that gaining access to home ownership is incredibly consequential for both individuals and for communities. Not to say that renting doesn't have benefits, but people reach a certain stage of life where they are ready to be rooted in the community. Owning a home provides financial security, the ability to build up equity over time, the ability to protect yourself against rent inflation over time. And so gaining access to home ownership, I think, provides people with both that financial security and that ability to stay in a community over time as well. And there's research that shows that the social benefits of home ownership include greater civic participation And I think particularly in this day and age when many communities across the country are facing gentrification pressures, people who own a home in those communities have much greater ability to stay and can continue to contribute to those communities as well.
So, as the face of the consumers change, the industry will need to shift to meet the evolving needs. This panel, The Changing Face of the Housing Counseling Consumer, will look at the changing demographics, emerging generations, and impacts on the housing industry. Our moderator is Dr. Marina Meyer, Social Science Analyst, HUD Office of Policy Development and Research. Marina has more than 18 years of experience designing and monitoring research projects evaluating HUD programs. Currently, she manages a variety of housing choice voucher, housing counseling, and homeownership research projects, including 2 national experiments. Dr. Chris Herbert, Managing Director of the Joint Center for Housing Studies, Harvard University. A key focus of his research has been on the financial and demographic dimensions of homeownership. In previous roles at the center, Chris led the team responsible for producing the center's annual State of the Nation's Housing Report, and he serves on the board of Freddie Mac and the Homeownership Preservation Program. Dr. Anna Jefferson, Associate and Scientist at Associates. Anna conducts research and evaluation focusing on access to housing and consumer finance. Her projects have included research examining the effects of gentrification and first-time homebuyer experiences. Her overarching research agenda is to expand the use of qualitative research to develop policies that are truly responsive to people's lives. Our last panelist is Sylvia Alvarez, founder and executive director of Housing Education Alliance. She co-authored a book entitled The American Nightmare: Strategies for Preventing, Surviving, and Overcoming Foreclosure. She is an appointee to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Advisory Board here in Washington, D.C. Welcome, panelists. Okay, Marina?
Thank you, Terry. So good morning. I'm here today with this distinguished panel to talk to you about the changing face of housing counseling consumers. And I'd like to start with Chris, since the Joint Center for Housing Studies just released the 2019 State of the Nation's Housing Report yesterday. What can you tell us about any changes in the demographics of the American homebuyer?
Thanks, Marina. It's great to be here. One of the things we covered in this year's report was a profile of first-time home buyers. And there's a tendency to think about first-time home buyers as young people married with kids starting out in life. Mm-hmm. That's certainly a part of the group, but it's only a small part of the group, and it's actually getting to be a smaller part of the group. So if we look at the demographics, the median age of first-time home buyers is about 34 years old, 35 years old. But 20% are over 45, and 10% are actually over 55. And so there are a wide range of age groups. In terms of household types, a quarter are that quintessential married couple with kids. Another 20% or so are married couples without kids. So about half are married couples, but half aren't. 20% are single persons. Another 10% are single parents, and 15% are non-family households. And then we think about the racial and ethnic mix of home buyers. About 2/3 right now are white, but fully a third are minority, and that share is growing. And the 15%, about half of that minority share, are Hispanic. So it's a very diverse group in terms of age, in terms of race, in terms of family type. And if we look at some of the statistics about who gets counseling, we have information from Homeownership Preservation Foundation on some of the folks coming through their group. They look a lot like that demographic, but they do skew a little more towards minority, a little more towards lower income. But for the most part, it's a pretty broad group. And surprisingly, among that group, I think the earlier panel mentioned, about a third of household incomes above 100% of AMI. So it's not all just lower income. So there's a broad range of people who are seeking homeownership, and a lot of those folks are coming into the housing counseling network along the way.
Great, thank you, Chris. Anna, I'd like to ask you, what has been your experience in terms of understanding how home buying fits into people's lives?
Sure. Also really happy to be here. Thanks for having me today. So when I work with people, when I do research projects with people who are approaching homeownership for the first time, we see, like other studies have seen in surveys and so forth, home buying really is going on in the context of their daily lives. So people are, by and large, navigating this process with advice from their family and friend networks. And that advice can be of varying qualities depending on the types of homeownership experiences that people have had. As family formation is a bit delayed, as we've seen in a lot of studies, including the Joint Centers report, people may be approaching homeownership later in life, but I find that people are still at a transition point in life, and it may be because they're in a newly formed household, they may have just gotten married, maybe expecting a first child, but there's a growing sense of dissatisfaction with renting. And so that's a major motivator for people to approach homeownership, to have that sense of security, stability, and autonomy about where they live, the choices that they make over where they live, and not getting pushed around by the rent going up and so forth. But a few trends that I see that I think are going to be increasing are, as Jonathan mentioned on the first panel, or I think maybe Sarah mentioned on the first panel, the gig economy and the different kind of underwriting that people are going to have to go through because of both an entrepreneurial spirit and because of economic conditions. People have varied sorts of incomes. They have varying hours that they're offered at a full-time job. They have a side hustle, and they may have unpredictable income. It goes up and down, and expense shocks. And so those things make it challenging for people to approach homeownership these days. Also, as people are coming of age and thinking about homeownership, many young adults have seen their family members and friends go through foreclosures or go through other kinds of housing distress. So there's an increasing awareness about the risks and the downsides of homeownership that I think today's consumers have more of than a previous generation of consumers.
Great, thank you, Anna. Now, Sylvia, given this, given the changes that Chris has mentioned in terms of the consumer and that Anna has mentioned, how have you and your agency responded? Have you changed how you provide homebuyer education and counseling?
We have really changed homebuyer education. We think we really were overdue to give a fresh new face to homebuyer education, and also to make it more accessible, like so many of the earlier panelists and Ann had mentioned. Most of the people who come to us have a difficult time. They have barriers. They have childcare issues. They have transportation. If you live up north, maybe it's a blizzard. You can't get to class, you know. So we looked at what was out there, and we wanted to do something that was more fresh and more up to date. And we created a program that's called Home Track Online. And it's all done with cartoons and funny videos. And we went down this path, especially after the studies came out that confirmed what all of us in this room know, that the value of housing counseling, but they quantified it because they gave it a number, 35%. So we wanted to make this more accessible, make it a happy and a fun experience. And I will tell you that many times people say, oh, online education is not as good, and people don't get the full value. But I will tell you that when you take this course, and it is peppered with humor, and retention goes way up exponentially. So it's a great course. I will also mention that a lot of people think, oh, the population is not ready for online. They can't use computers, the Hispanic population. Well, I will tell you that I like to say that I've been in the housing business since I was 9 years old, because when my parents came to this country, they couldn't speak English. And by the time I was 9, they had saved up enough, and I was their translator between the banker, the realtor, the builder, everyone that was involved in the transaction. And our class, our online class, has actually become a family bonding experience, because the kids are helping the parents or the grandparents, and it's become a really, we're thrilled with this. And we're very excited that it's now launched in Spanish. So it's available online, yes.
Great. Now, you had mentioned the edutainment aspect of your online course. Can you tell me how your program appeals to future homebuyers and how it differs from others in the market? Is that the main feature?
It is, but all the lessons that are required, we follow the national national industry standards. So everything is covered, but it's done with a fresh approach. I'll give you an example. We have some professional comedians that actually did some of the videos for us. One of the videos is Uncle Sam. He teaches the homeowner how to, the tax benefits of home ownership. One of the other videos is The Good Father. It's filmed in an Italian restaurant. We got the spaghetti and the wine there, and he teaches them how to make an offer that won't be refused. And then one of our favorites, actually, we have a lot of feedback on this one, and it's To Catch a Predator. To Catch a Predatory Lender, which is a spoof on To Catch a Predator. I don't know if anyone's seen that show where law enforcement comes in and they do a sting. Well, we have Will Getcha, who is the predatory lender. He comes to the home of an underwaged borrower, not an underaged minor. And so people enjoy the course. They really do. And they can't say enough good things about it. And anyone here who wants a free code to take it, let us know.
Great. Now, I just want to open some questions up to the group. To give you some context, in the HUD First-Time Homebuyer Education and Counseling Demonstration, where hopefully we'll have short-term impact report out later this week, maybe, we found that focus group participants were largely not aware of homebuyer education and counseling services available to them. So a question I have is, how would you propose increasing awareness of these services?
What we've done is we've tried to partner with realtors and be involved with them, join committees, do whatever is necessary. And I think we've made some headway there. And like the earlier panelists said, I think that once they realize that we're not the enemy, we're there to help them. A consumer who's been educated is much easier to work with. You spend a lot less time with them. So we are going at this through the realtor community.
And I'll just echo, I think that that's hugely important because we find that realtors or lenders, whoever the first housing professional that somebody decides to work with when they're buying a home, that becomes their go-to source of information. And once they've set up those information systems, it's really hard to interject and change anything. And so I don't know if there's opportunity at the state level to work on the different education standards for realtors to make sure that housing counseling is included as part of the realtor certification education curriculum, because that's a way that information gets in front of every single relevant person. Another thought would be to look for touch points that every home buyer has to go through in the home buying process. For context, I did ethnographic research on the foreclosure crisis in Michigan in 2009 and 10, where the state had passed a law that every buyer had to receive certified mail that served the foreclosure notice and had a list of housing counseling agencies and explained access to a state law that gave them some time to negotiate a solution. So you need to find an analogous touch point for home buyers, which to me the best one I think is the loan pre-qualification. So if we bring lenders on board, large-scale lenders who have a high volume of approvals, if they provide links to housing counseling agencies' information, at that time when you get the pre-approval letter, it's a way to build awareness into the transaction.
Great.
You know, I was just thinking about what Jonathan was describing today in terms of the online presence and marketing. It seems like you definitely would want to get to consumers while they start to think about buying a home and before they start establishing. I think these realtors and lenders are an important source of it, but it's got to be before. And so it strikes me that if you're online looking at Trulia, looking at Zillow, looking at any of these sites, having things that kind of pop up and have like public service announcements that kind of make you aware of the opportunity to get counseling, education, and the like, would be in real time where people need it. And there's the question for the industry is who's going to pay for that? You know, during the foreclosure crisis, Gene, who's here, can tell you about HPF and about the importance of public service campaigns and getting the 1-800 number out there. And that somebody's got to pay for that. And I think there's a real role for the government to think about how do we make this third-party nonprofit counseling aware to people through things like Zillow and Trulia and the like. I mean, when I go into Google and I type, whatever I'm typing, all of a sudden 6 things pop out. So one of the things that should pop up when I say homes for sale should be counseling agencies.
Approved housing counseling, yes. So along those lines, how would you communicate the value proposition of homebuyer education and counseling to the consumer?
I will tell you that I have a real estate license, and I've had it for many years. I won't even write my own contract because it's that complicated. I think you need to go to professionals who work in this every day. And I think just mentioning the housing crisis, our agency, we helped 14,000 people with foreclosure programs to help them save their homes. So to me, use a little bit of fear and say, you're 35% less likely to become a victim of foreclosure if you work with a housing counselor. So I like to use fear once in a while.
I like to use stress reduction. Yeah. So I think, surveys from the National Association of Realtors and others have found that home buying is the single most stressful event in people's lives right now. And when we do research following people through the process, having people make video diaries about what they're going through, their stress levels are up and down. It's really emotional and all over the place. And the value that focus group participants in the first-time homebuyer study said after they went through the counseling was that it reduced their stress levels. Mm-hmm. I think that marketing the services in terms of building up people's confidence and not making mistakes doesn't quite hit the right notes because people don't think that they're going to make mistakes. People don't think of themselves as lacking confidence and lacking skills. But if you frame it as the situation being stressful, mm-hmm. everybody wants the situation to be less stressful and to have more control over a difficult situation.
Great.
I just think it's important also to bear in mind when you say the value proposition of housing counseling, what is it mean in this case? So we're talking about counseling. Is this an 8-hour class on a Saturday? Is this a series of classes on Tuesday nights? Is this a website where I can watch some videos? Is this a quiz I can do online? Is this something I get on telephone? They're very different forms, very different intensities, mm-hmm. and each of those have different values and different costs. And so, I think that the industry has already moved this way. I think it needs to move this way more, which is to say there's lots of different ways for consumers to engage with this. I mean, you think about how much people want self-help, right? So you go online and Google on YouTube, how to unclog my toilet, mm-hmm. Any number of things. And how do I go about buying a house? So those things have kind of low cost. Then the question is, to the kind of things Anna was talking about is, there's things that might need more intensity, and that might require more time and more cost, but you may be able to sell them on that by having got them through these other touch points where they can understand what it is they don't know. Mm-hmm. So I think we have to think about it as a very broad range of interactions, and each one of them has a value proposition.
Great. Also, in the HUD First-Time Homebuyer Education and Counseling Demonstration, we found that study participants who did not complete the education said it did not work for their schedule or the course was too long. And then for those that did not complete the counseling, scheduling was the main concern. So what are some of your ideas for making homebuyer education and counseling services more convenient for the consumer?
I'm going to go back to technology. We find that most of the people who take our online course are doing this in the evening or on the weekends. So we know that it fits into their lifestyle. And our course also, many of the courses require a one-on-one counseling session, which at that point is where we can see if they really, we drill them down is make sure that they understand the material, and then of course allow them to continue to have counseling sessions. And we do this over the phone, we do it via Skype. We have to reduce the stress for these buyers. Why would we make them go and take a whole day to sit in a class when they can get the same information, or maybe even better or easier to understand in the comfort of their home when the kids are asleep and they have no distractions?
And I think this is another area where the Office of Housing Counseling can maybe work on the standards, because a lot of the counseling is provided in these 8-hour classes on a Saturday because that's the standard that's required to get the certificate. If there were options for people to test out of some of the content and have just tailored information that's applicable to the gaps in knowledge that they have, I think that would really increase people's sense that this is valuable for them and it really works for their needs. Yeah, so I'll just say that.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add. I think it's got, the idea of a one-size-fits-all approach is obviously not the way to go. And we've learned a lot about how to use technology, whether it's web-based, telephonic, or the like, to be able to reach people where they are, give them the information that they need and the doses they need. And that just has to be really the direction the industry goes.
Great. Given the mention of the foreclosure crisis before, and that it was about 10 years ago that it was ending, how do you think the foreclosure crisis is shaping the homebuyer experience today?
They're definitely more cautious, and for a while there, a lot of what we now call boomerang buyers, many of them, I never want to own a home again. And now we're seeing them back. So, yes.
Was just said that they're more cautious, and they're also they have a narrow eye. I have a needle to fit through. So 15 years ago, you could walk in and fog a mirror and get a mortgage of some type or other, and which was a real risk for people who would benefit from greater preparation. Now you really have to work hard to get through this process, particularly if you're folks in the gig economy or other things. And so I think there's a real need for folks to have more assistance in getting through the process in a good way, in the sense that they're more likely to come out with a good mortgage product, a safe mortgage product, but it's going to be harder to navigate that process. And there's a number of studies. Freddie just came out with one, Fannie's done in the past, about how much misconception there is about how tight the mortgage process is now and how much down payment you have to have. So there's clearly ways in which the context today is going to require more help to get through it. Another thing I would say, and we talked about this in some of our prep calls, was about the notion that I give a profile of first-time home buyers. There's new buyers, or not new buyers, old buyers coming back who have been stung by the process, who will have credit blemishes that they have to work through. So there's a whole new class of buyers too.
Mm-hmm. And I think as prices have rebounded in most markets, housing prices are rising, and so affordability is a major concern for people again. It's not necessarily the cheapest option to go out and buy a house, but the barriers to entry are related to both amassing the down payment, maybe misconceptions about how much down payment is needed, and the credit standards. And so one way that counseling really gets people through the door is by being a condition for accessing down payment assistance products. And I think as more people need those to enter homeownership, then that increases the demand for counseling services. The only challenge is to get them there early instead of the Saturday before their loan closes.
Yes. Yes. Ideal. So I think now we'd like to open it up for questions.
Okay, feel free to come up to the mic and ask a question.
We answered all the questions.
Yeah. I can't believe it. There's got to be at least one question. Okay.
Actually, we have 14 branch agencies throughout the country that are now using HomeTrack. And as I mentioned, it was recently launched in Spanish. If anyone wants to see a demo video of it, which has some of the funny videos in there, on our website, there's a link that can take you to the landing page for HomeTrack. So that's HEAUSA.org. A little plug.
So I have a question. We've heard a lot about how demographics of the home buyer is changing. And I was struck by the comment from Sierra Rodriguez about Hispanic families being very interested in multi-generational housing. And I'm just curious if, in terms of demographic characteristics, you see anything else that's particular
to a particular racial group, minority group, age group, or income level?
We have seen more generational, or as she had mentioned earlier, we are seeing more of that. Not a lot, but we are seeing more of that, where it takes more than one household to, maybe it's the grandparents together with the parents and then the children. So we are seeing more of that. Prices are so high, you need more income to be able to do it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how this tracks by racial or ethnic group or nation of origin, but we had a participant in a study where I was following a small group of first-time home buyers, and she was buying with her brother, again, because she hadn't formed a romantic partnership, so she didn't have a spouse or partner to pool resources with, but had somebody else in the family. So it was a sort of atypical family relationship, because having access to more incomes is a major asset to buying a house. So that just may look a little bit differently than it did 10 or 15 or 20 years ago.
I have a question for Maureen and Anna. Now, you're in the midst of the pre-purchase counseling experiment, and one of the things you both had to work through was the question of recruiting people into that study. What did you learn from that process about who was attracted to it, and what are some of the factors that, I know there was a question too about choosing in person versus telephonic. What lessons did you take away from that in terms of who's being attracted to counseling?
Yeah, so now the HUD First Time Home Buyer Education and Counseling Demonstration started enrollment through 3 national lenders in January of 2014, and we finished enrollment in January of 2016. So it was a little while ago, and we're tracking folks, and as I said, the short-term impact report with findings from 12 to 18 months, approximately 12 to 18 months after random assignment should be out later this week. But what we found in terms of enrollment was that the sample is very diverse. So we're about 39% white and 61% of different minority groups, about 25% Hispanic, 23% African American, 11% Asian. I'm not doing the math in my head, but it's approximate. And so that was very interesting, as well as these were prospective first-time home buyers. So again, some might have cycled into homeownership again, but largely they were coming in for the first time. And in terms of their preference, so we randomly assigned them to 2 different treatment groups, a remote services group that was offered the opportunity for online education and telephone counseling, and then an in-person group that was offered in-person group education at local HUD-approved housing counseling agencies and in-person one-on-one counseling. And these, again, this was 28 metro areas across the country with 63 local HUD-approved housing counseling agencies, so we had a wide coverage. In terms of the participation in-person was less than we expected, and so we changed about 9 months in and started offering tracking preferences and offering, for those who were randomly assigned to the in-person group, the choice of remote or in-person services. And 75% of those chose remote services. So that's an indication of, I think, some of the forthcoming trends, but it's important to keep in mind that we had to exclude, just by nature of the experiment, there was a control group that was not offered any services. So we had to exclude anyone who was coming in with a down payment assistance grant that required counseling. So our demographics are slightly different. I think the credit score is a little higher, the income's a little higher, the education's a little higher than the typical housing counseling client who would be coming to a local agency. Yeah.
Feel free.
Thank you guys for your comments. So some of the most heartbreaking stories are in the vulnerable population of aging homeowners. And so I was wondering if you could comment on what that trend looks like, because we're reading about it all the time, but also what the needs look like there, and how do you reach that population? Is that going to be a mobile first kind of strategy. So just interested in your thoughts on that group.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, one of the things the Joint Center has been tracking over time is the share of older adults who are entering retirement with mortgage debt. And over the last 20 years, the share with debt has doubled, and the amount of debt they're carrying has doubled. So whereas, 30, 40 years ago, that was a really significant goal of people, which is to get out from under the mortgage, to have that mortgage burning party. What we've had over the last 20 or 30 years, I think, is both a shift in attitudes and also a long-term secular decline in interest rates, which every few years offers you the opportunity to refinance and save some money. And when you do that, if you don't think about it, you're re-up for 30 years. Suddenly, you're 65 years old and you still have 15 years left on your mortgage. So, I think we're seeing in the reverse mortgage program, and Lori Goodman can probably talk about this better than I can, the age of people who are taking out reverse mortgages has fallen quite a bit over time. So a lot of people, I'm not sure the shares, but are using it to take out a forward mortgage that they can no longer afford. Not an unimportant way to manage your finances in your older years, but I think that this is a trend that's been showing some signs of leveling off a bit, but it's certainly not getting better. So I think we're going to have a lot of older folks in retirement with mortgage debt and trying to figure out solutions for them. In some cases, it might be a reverse mortgage. In other cases, it might be sell and downsize. There's a whole host of questions there, I think, that we're only starting to really deal with. But thank you for asking that question, because this is going to be an enormous issue going forward. Is how do we handle older adults that are financially stressed? It's not a question of getting them back into a job. They're retired and their income is fixed, and so that's going to require other solutions. And in that stage of life, making decisions about selling and moving are not easy. And so there's a whole level of advice and support that's going to have to go along with that.
And just to that, I just want to say, not unrelated to mortgage debt, but another surprising thing that we've seen in doing surveys about financial well-being in general is the share of older adults that are carrying student loan debt. I believe in our sample it was up to, don't quote me, you can look at the report if you want the specific, but I think it was around a third of older Americans were carrying student loan debt. And so the whole package about financial health for older adults is really changing as they're taking on student debt either for themselves, reskilling, or trying to get back in the workforce, or taking it out on behalf of their children or grandchildren. The financial picture about financially distressed older adults is more complicated than it used to be.
Come on up.
Well, because that's certainly something that, we the Homeownership Preservation Foundation teamed up or affiliated with Green Path Financial Wellness. Part of the rationale last year, and part of the rationale there was that we're seeing a lot of clients who had a broader need for financial wellness services beyond the housing. And so beyond the specific housing issues. So being able to offer sort of a broader array of resources and services to help them deal with whatever the issues are that are ultimately affecting their ability to manage through the mortgage was just an important consideration. But you're right, we are seeing a lot of folks, and I think it gets back to your point, so, it's like people who, it's wonderful you can get people who coming in as first-time home buyers or boomerang home buyers to get them engaged with a process that they can carry forward as they go through as they transition through life. When they hit a default situation or a challenge with other forms of debt, but that it's a relationship that goes with them over time that helps them manage, all the specific challenges around finances, through their lifetimes. So, just a point.
Good morning. Good morning. Mine is not so much a question, but I'd like for you all to elaborate on that economic component. The small businesses, how you support them with the home ownership with the educational program. If somebody would elaborate on that, because I know that's active. I dealt with Sylvia on that, so I'd like to just, hear a little more.
We go into large employers, not small businesses, but we go into large employers and we offer to come in and do a class for them, a lunch and learn. And we schedule it out over 5 days. A couple of hospitals have taken us up on that. I will say that for the smaller business, we actually, our clients are small business owners. So we see them every day. And we're trying to get the word out so that everyone understands the value of this type of education. We have made friends with people who they're still calling us. They let us know when their kids are going to be are graduating, or their daughter's having a baby. We become part of a family. So there is a continuing connection with our students. It's not like we're done with them. And then we also follow up. We follow up a year later. And after that, it's a yearly touch that we give them to make sure that everything is still okay and to let them know that we're still around. So I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
More questions? Anybody else in the audience? So I think we're running just a little bit early, correct? Oh, I have another question. Oh, come right on up.
Patty Hassan at Clarify. In the housing study, have you noticed trends with the non-regulated mortgage market, and how is that going to impact the future of lending?
So this is a better question maybe for Lori Goodman in the next panel, but I would say, so far I would say most of the lending that's been happening has been happening within the kind of QM space, FHA, GSEs, and the like. There's some jumbos. There's not a lot of lending outside of that space. There's been, every year you see talk about that space growing, and it's someday I think it will. It hasn't come yet. Mostly what we've seen is non-bank lending growing, but coming through the FHA and the GSE channels, which raises questions, I think, about the safety and soundness of the system in the event of downturns. But, I saw a headline today coming in that this may get a little technical, but the GSE patch, which allows the GSEs to have debt-to-income ratios above 43%, which is the qualified mortgage limit, up until 2021. If that goes away, there's a lot of lenders looking in this non-QM space, that outside that space, looking to come in, because right now a third of the GSE lending is exceeding 43 DTI. So it depends on what CFPB and FHFA does, how they handle that. May open the door to a lot of that non-QM lending. So, my own personal view is I think having most of the lending happening within that space, within QM loans and FHA and GSEs, is providing a lot more security in the system. And as much as we want to expand the credit box, I'd worry if that started getting too much a share of the market. But I'll ask Lori the question when she's on the next panel, see what she says.
Do you have another question? Feel free.
Good morning, Joke Kimbawali here. I'm the director of the Housing Counseling Network at NCRC. And so my question really is about who's in the market itself. And we talk about millennials and African Americans and Hispanics and the gaps that we see in the homeownership rate, but also the different barriers that they have and the interest. You're talking about millennials who are entrepreneurial. I want to share everything. I want to share my car. I want to share where I live. I want to Airbnb it out and be entrepreneurial in that regard to pay for it itself. So I'm wondering if any of you can speak to the outreach that it takes to reach these different communities where they are to kind of close that gap to homeownership.
A great question. I think you said who's out there in the market. I think really what you're asking is who's not out there in the market. I think there's a lot of evidence, various Fannie and Freddie and the Urban Institute has done this as well, looking at people's understanding of the process and the misconceptions people have. And so I think there's a lot of people who are precluding themselves from looking to own a home because of the fact they think it's a bridge too far. So I think that's, as we were talking about earlier, I think understanding who those folks are and how do you reach them and how do you give them the information that they need to empower themselves in some ways to move ahead. And I think it's the groups you mentioned. I think it's going to tend to be historically disadvantaged groups who don't have a family history of homeownership, don't have someone, Hannah described the fact that family and friends are an important source of information. Maybe you don't have those groups. And so I think reaching out to those historically disadvantaged groups that don't have that history of home ownership to make sure that they are aware of both what it takes, whether or not they qualify now, what they need to do to get there, and also what kind of assistance is out there. There's a fair number of down payment assistance programs that people may not be aware of. So I think that's a great question.
And I think a lot of people self-select out of homeownership because they perceive themselves as not creditworthy. And whether it's they've had one bad interaction with a lender, I had somebody in one of these projects following somebody through his trajectory who had owned a food truck, and he was denied a business loan. And so that to him was like determinative. He said, I'm not creditworthy, it's gonna be a real reach for me. I Googled mortgages for bad credit when I was looking, which opens up a number of channels of information that vary in quality, but he did choose FHA. And then I think because he was in a context in a community that was very richly resourced with down payment assistance and counseling agencies, chose to go to a nonprofit. He went to NACA to try to work towards that goal and work towards establishing enough income history, right? Because he was working for himself. When you're working for yourself, you have to have 2 years of employment history. And so with him, I bring up in particular because there were enough resources and visibility around that he was able to do that without too much casting around. But for other people, it's really discouraging when you self-identify as being low income or you have a self-perception that you have low credit. And studies find that lower income folks tend to underestimate what their credit scores actually are when they get pulled, in a lot of cases. It varies by individual. So I think, again, somehow working through community channels to try to spread the word and work with people's, who are not willing and ready to identify as a homeowner yet, because there's also an identity shift that goes into it.
We had a client just recently that fits that same exact explanation that you just gave. It was a single dad with 4 children under 12 that he was raising by himself. His wife had died earlier. And he had applied once and it had been turned down a few years back, and he didn't want to go through that again. Because it does discourage you. It makes you feel like you're not worthy. And we had to talk him off the ledge.
They tell you that you're not worthy.
So, we did have to talk him off the ledge a couple times because he made 2 offers. The homes, after we got him, mortgage ready, he makes 2 offers, and the homes did not pass inspection. So he was discouraged again, and he felt like, I'm just not going to ever own a home. But he's a very happy homeowner right now, and another one of our success stories.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's clearly where the HUD-approved housing counseling agency can really help, whether it's online, by phone, or in local communities. So I think that outreach and the PSA suggestion that Chris had in terms of when somebody does that Google search would be really critical to make folks more aware. We need to increase awareness and make the services more convenient.
All right. So I think we're maybe just 1 or 2 minutes early, which just means you guys get a little longer break. We're going to take a break right now. We'd like to ask you to be back at 11 o'clock sharp, because when you come back, Sarah Gerecke is going to introduce our acting Deputy Secretary, Brian Montgomery, who's going to give remarks. We just thank you so much for coming. There is coffee on the 3rd floor. If you do happen to leave the building, and we're definitely not encouraging that, you will need to be escorted back to the auditorium. All right, we'll see you at 11. Thanks.